Okay. In order to establish a quorum at the beginning of this meeting, because we are holding it electronically, we need to do a roll call to establish our quorum. And I have asked Ms. Judy Cantlin to do that roll call. So when she identifies your name, would you please acknowledge as present? Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Talia Lomax O'Neill.
Present.
Bob Cooper.
Present.
Don Hardin.
Present.
Shannon Raybon.
Present.
And Dr. Cynthia Kroom let me know that she cannot attend today's meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have established a quorum to begin the meeting. First, I'd like to read a statement, please. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the governor issued Executive Order 16, which has now been extended, authorizing boards to meet and conduct their essential business by electronic means if the board determines that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Before considering items of the agenda, the board needs to determine by a roll call vote that the meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the board and meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Similarly, we need to take a roll. Is this just a roll call vote, Macy, or do I need a motion to adopt this?
We need a motion and a roll call vote.
Okay, thank you. So I need a motion to authorize us to conduct this in the electronic meeting and a second, and Judy will follow that up with a roll call vote.
This is Bob Cooper. I make the motion.
Okay, do you have a second?
Don Hardin, I make the second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Unless otherwise noticed, I think that was a unanimous vote here, but Judy, go ahead.
Okay. Talia Lomax O'Neill.
Aye.
Bob Cooper.
Aye.
Don Hardin.
Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Thank you very much for that. We have that's unanimous. We're unanimous on that vote. So we will move into the agenda. And Ms. Lane, you have prepared and submitted that information for the board's consideration last evening. And okay, so first of all, in your packet is the meeting minutes from the last meeting that we had. You all should have received those minutes last night. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes or any corrections that are needed?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
That should have been received on Tuesday night.
Tuesday night. It should be in your board packet. It is page 3 of the board packet information.
Madam Chair.
Is that Mr. Hardin?
It is.
Yes.
If it's okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Okay, do I have a second?
Madam Chair, if I could interrupt for just a moment.
Okay.
We have a notice from Ms. Nikki Eke regarding the minutes.
Okay.
And Ms. Eke has requested a revision to the minutes to reflect the procurement regulations related to, 408.08.01, as well as 412.040.12 and 412.040.13. 4.12.040.13. And her request is that the minutes be revised to reflect that the regulations as presented were revised by the board and the revision was approved.
Okay. Mr. Harden, would you like to revise your motion?
Yes, I'd like to revise the motion based on Attorney Nikki's recommendations to correct them.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Now we'll go on to discussion. Ms. Lane, can you specifically read how these minutes will be modified? I'm assuming this happens on page 1 of 2 under procurement regulation modifications. I just would like if you could restate, please, exactly what will be added to the minutes.
In the section addressing procurement regulations, as you've noted, please modify the last sentence to add the following language specifying the regulations that were revised. And that would read, after much discussion, the board approved revisions to the following regulations: R408.08.01, R412.040.12, and R412.040.13.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I just wanted the board to know specifically where that would be entered. Is there any other discussion? Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second on that one, or was my second on the original motion? Can I get a second on the revised motion?
I thought my second was on the revised motion, but so,
Okay,
second.
thank you. Okay, all in favor? Say aye. Roll call vote, please, Ms. Kentlin.
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Yes.
Cooper,
Aye.
Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion approved unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Lane, for giving us that update from Ms. Eke. So now we will go back to the agenda, and the purchasing agent's report is next. Ms. Lane.
Good morning, board members. I will be very brief. You do have a copy of the purchasing agent's report in your handouts, the staff handouts. There are only a couple of things that I draw your attention to, and I'll remain available for any questions that you have. Those are just related to the significant activity that procurement activity that we have engaged pursuant to the response to the public health emergency created by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a significant number of emergency purchases, and you'll see some of those in your packet. Contracts to provide services to Metro's homeless shelter related to this COVID response, as well as face masks for distribution, cloth face masks, et cetera. The other thing that I would point attention to is that staff continue to work remotely, 100% of the procurement division staff working remotely. I will also note that pursuant to the request, the recommendation of this body, the architects and engineers master list was officially eliminated via council action last month. So that action rising from this board has culminated. And I would also just note for information that the procurement division has launched work on the establishment of a vendor performance management framework that really allows Metro to manage performance of vendors, working collaboratively with them to established performance expectations, as well as on multiple award contracts, the development of a process for equitable distribution of work to ensure that when we're using multiple contractors for IDIQ type services, that we have a solid process to ensure that we're identifying ways to ensure there's equity in the distribution. I'm available for any other questions related to other items in the report.
I'll recognize any board members that have any questions right now for Ms. Lang. Just Mr. Harden.
Yes, first of all, thank you, Michelle Lane, for your report. Curious to know if, with the pandemic still getting stronger, not weakening, do we have a plan to have more spends, I guess, to that effort? And have we put in budgets in place, support from the mayor's office to do such?
I want to clarify, Mr. Harden, that I understand your question. Is the question really, do we anticipate the level of procurement spend to increase related to the response?
Yes, basically. I guess to clarify, you definitely had to do things in an emergency. And so I'm wondering, now that we know what we know, you may have to do more of the same kind of spending. So is there a plan to do more spending with the homeless community and masks and certain PPE and certain things? I'm just curious if there's a plan to spend more of that and do, instead of in an emergency situation.
So what I will say is that we have been looking at each of the requests that come, those requests that are emergent, that don't lend themselves to any time that's allowed to solicit. We've entered into emergency contracts consistent with federal guidelines. There are some instances that the cloth face masks, for example, we did competitively solicit those. We just did that under emergency conditions, meaning because of the declaration of public health emergency and the request from the health department to procure those items rapidly, the emergency request was approved and we solicited it competitively. However, we did not leave it on the street for the amount of time that is specified in the regulations, as is allowed at the discretion of the purchasing agent. I made that decision based upon the emergency request. So it was competitive. It just was not on the street for the full amount of time. So rather than being on the street, for 10 days, I believe it was on the street for 7.
And I appreciate the competitive nature. I guess I didn't think about it from that angle, but I was thinking about more from you being supportive and had the resources that you needed to make these spends. And perhaps since you have some kind of data from the cost of what you have been spending, maybe maybe you have to do less competitive bidding, if you will. I'm not sure about the rules on that, but at least I think what I would hope is you have the tools you need to support this pandemic from your perspective, from how you've been doing. That was the basis of that question.
The only thing that I would add to that is that the metropolitan government has advice from, legal advice, certainly, from attorneys, as well as from a consulting, firm that is really poised to assist the city in ensuring that it gets maximum reimbursement under the CARES Act. And pursuant to the guidance that we've received from both areas, the recommendation there is that we compete these items as much as we can. And when we cannot, that we move toward, kind of a non-competed solicitation, but that we have sound documentation for it. So the point that I'm getting to is that we're always going to err on the side of competing it if we can. Sometimes the nature of what we're buying and the time frames and everything that's associated with it don't lend to being able to compete it. But in those instances, we're providing very sound justification using forms provided by by our consultants based on what they know the federal government will want to see to ensure that we've got justification. So we're competing things as much as we can.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Mr. Hardin?
Yeah, sure.
I think part of what I heard from Mr. Hardin was he wanted to make sure that you had the resources that you needed in order to deliver services at this time, given the current, kind of state of events, and that you were resourced properly. I think that was part of the question. Would you like to address that portion of it, Ms. Lang, in terms of just from an operational standpoint?
Yeah, we're not staffed, in my opinion, where we need to be. I think we're at about a 30% deficit, and that's just, people moving, and this was prior really to the height of the pandemic. We were moving toward filling, positions, and then we encountered, I would say, and Chair Lomax O'Neill can correct me if I'm wrong, but two freezes. One was really related to the state of the fiscal situation within Metro, and so we were kind of on a hold with filling, and then we were green-lighted to move ahead, and then we encountered some issues with the referendum that was on the ballot, and Metro instituted yet another hiring freeze. We have been granted an exception, and we anticipate at the end of this month additional staff will be coming on board. We're doing a lot of work with fewer people, and departments, I believe, of course they've got their needs, but the mayor's office has been very clear that, they want us to be focused on items that are related to, the pandemic response, as well as to responses related to the March tornadoes. And we do still have a few things that are trickling through related there too. So we're making it work. Things are a little slower than we'd like to see them, but we are making them, we're working through them, and hopefully with additional staff coming on at the end of this month, we'll be able to see some continued improvement there. But the short answer to your question is we're not fully at the point to have all the resources that we need, but we're on track to get them.
So noted. And finally, if there's something that we could do, of course, the mayor's office has something to say about it, but if there was something that this board could do in support, as an example, if you brought us a proposal that we could help with and say, yes, we'd like to see something happen to assist, then we would certainly entertain that. But from a legal perspective, we have at least two attorneys on this call that may have something to say about that. But from my perspective, I would like to see that you have what you need to do some of the emergent things that you have to do. That's all.
And if I could just address that, Mr. Hardin, I can tell you that purchasing is a high priority in terms of the activity. As Ms. Lang noted, even though there has been a hiring freeze, we have received exceptions for her to backfill a couple of positions. So she is, and that operation is front of mind in terms of priority setting and making sure that work keeps moving forward during this time. Is there anyone else on the board that would like to speak to the purchasing agent's report? Please unmute yourself.
I have one other thing, if no one else has. I'm looking at the purchases for major procurement activity of values of $5 million or more, and I see a trend of no SMWBE participation on several of them. And I'm wondering if what's going on there, and if there's something we can do to help, or what's the explanation behind many of these with no MBE participation at all?
I fully anticipated that question, Mr. Hardin. That if you'll take note of the types of purchases that are listed there. For example, there are a few of these that are for the Metro Public Works Department, and I just, as a side note, not necessarily related there too, I noticed that our head of our Department of Public Works is on the call today. But bituminous asphalt material, those are items that are excluded, that are not applicable under the Equal Business Opportunity Program because they're goods, they're materials. So you would not have any participation on that. On the computer hardware and software, that was a cooperative purchase, and it's for goods again. So even if we had procured it directly ourselves, we likely would not have seen any participation. And I say likely because you never know exactly what's going to happen. But in the past, when we have procured this, we've not had any participation on it. And largely it's because our programming doesn't apply to it as established in the code. If you'll move down through that list, again, fire hydrant valves, parts, and items, again, goods. So a number of the items that are on this list are goods. When you do see, for example, the sidewalk and bikeway program, the goals that were established by the Equal Business Opportunity Program were met on that project. And then on street sweeping and vision administration, the program was applied, and I'll defer to Christopher Wood if there are any follow-up questions on that. I'm not sure. In fact, I want to correct myself on street sweeping. We did not have a goal on that one. But what we've done is where the program is applicable, the BAO has reviewed it to ensure that, they either met the goal or there's satisfactory reason why they were not able to meet the goal. But I would note that the majority of the items that are on this list are for items or things that do not fit the scope of the program.
Christopher, Mr. Wood, I'd like to give you an opportunity to provide any comments if you have any.
Good morning, Chair and other board members. So what I would just follow up and say is from Q1, as Ms. Lane mentioned, all of those weren't applicable to the EBO program. We did have 7 projects that were awarded during Q1, which were applicable to EBO. And at the prime level, we did have 2 WBE primes awarded, and we had 1 SBE prime awarded. But I think it's important, as to a reminder, to let you all know that these resulted from emergency procurements, which had quick turnarounds, because we're dealing with the pandemic still and enduring other abnormal circumstances, which basically eliminates DB participation due to regulatory exclusions and the sense of urgency on those projects.
Any question from Mr. Wood? Ms. Harden?
Yes, well, I mean, I know we've put some work in towards diversity. We've got some more. We got another wave of work to do because, I mean, you add these numbers up, you quickly get close to $100 million worth of work, and there's little participation. And I would think that if we have a message out there because they are goods, kind of sends up the message that maybe there's no participation required in the goods department. So maybe if I'm a DBE, maybe I think it's an uphill battle for me even to try to go in that arena. So I think that, we're sending the wrong message, in my opinion. It's just me, but I think that we need to address in the future how we include quote unquote goods. I know that, you're buying computers. There's a lot of computer guys out there who could install, the small companies that could install computers for Dell if they so desired. You look at Jones Brothers, bituminous asphalt materials. I'm sure they could get someone to help out with some portion of that work and so forth and so on. So I think we have to do some soul searching to figure out how we include the goods, because there are opportunities are not happening because we're not trying in this department. And I don't mean to be so blunt about not trying, but that's how it appears.
If Madam Chair, if I could just speak to that quickly.
Please, go ahead, Ms. Lane.
I would take note or ask Mr. Harden to take note that when we do have these, various projects that come through, there is a painstaking, and I call it painstaking, and I'm not the one who's doing it. Amber Gardner, our procurement data officer, is the person who's looking at these items and requesting through collaboration with the departments information that helps her understand the extent to which there are items that can be procured that are not just goods. So we're looking at all of these with bituminous asphalt materials. You're literally buying that material and that's it. And it's being provided to the Public Works Department. So where there are opportunities for us to source out some items and subcontract it, as the Equal Business Opportunity Program is a subcontractor-based program, our procurement data officer is mining through all of that information and then comparing what she learns about the availability and the data that we have to what the department provides us in terms of information about the work items, and then we're applying goals. If there's no opportunity to subcontract because all we're doing is buying this bituminous asphalt, then we would not have any opportunity really to apply the program. I do want to just make note that I think that it's important to consider that for this quarter that's being reported, there was a significant pullback, or I don't want to say that it was a significant reduction. That's the best word to use, in the kinds of purchases that were just normal, operational purchases. Many departments and, the deputy finance director, the chair of this board, can speak to this probably better than I can, but many departments were requested to really consider their spending and only move forward with those things that were absolutely critical. And so there are certain things that you'll see on this list that are critical to the operations of departments that had to be procured. And if you were to compare this information to previous quarters, you'd notice a very distinct difference in the kinds of items that are showing up on the major list. Having said that, the last thing that I will say is I would refer you to the additional attachments in this report. And they are the contracts that are that are reported to the council as required by the code. And you can see that even on those smaller projects that were core to, the operations of the government that we had to procure, that were not just what we would call, I'm losing the word, this doesn't happen. So everybody take a note. Michelle Lane's at a loss for the word. But, spending that departments could choose to or not choose to make, you'll still see that there's significant from month to month. There's significant participation that's noted. We've really doubled our spending with MBEs and WBEs in the year that the Equal Business Opportunity Program has been in play. I agree with you that from the standpoint of, providing broader opportunities, especially with the size of these contracts, that there's some additional work to be done. And I think that we can take what your recommendation is here today to note and see what kinds of things we can do to move forward on the good side of things. I'm sorry to take so long.
It's okay. It's okay. Is there any other discussion on the purchasing agent's report?
So, this is Shannon. I had a quick question. Michelle, could you give us a little bit of flavor? I noticed down in the miscellaneous section where your staff is providing significant procurement support to the sheriff's office staff. Can you give us a flavor of what that looks like? Is part of my question. And the other part of it is, based on what that support is there some type of programmatic or operational framework that support kind of falls into? Like, you guys have pretty strict guidelines for how you will award contracts and kind of do what you do. What does that support look like for the sheriff's office?
Yes, very, very good question. So as most folks probably know, the management of the Metro Detention Facility transitioned from CoreCivic to the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. And in order to facilitate that transition, there were a number of procurement steps, amendments to contracts that needed to take place, especially as it relates to the provision of medical healthcare services, as well as food services and other items that were needed to support that transition. And so our office was involved in, regular meetings and conversations toward the final procurement outcomes of amended contracts and newly established competitively procured contracts to support that transition. So there were a number of things or a number of services that were being provided by CoreCivic that were now required to be provided by the DCSO, the Davidson County Sheriff's Office, as the new manager of that facility. And we were, active in putting those procurement mechanisms in place to support that transition.
So Michelle, and I probably know the answer to this, is this an office that you guys will support on an ongoing basis, or was it a one-time thing just for the transition?
No, we support all of the, the metro departments and semi-autonomous boards and commissions. I will note that the work needed to support this transition was significantly more than what we would normally provide to, the sheriff's office. I mean, normally we would be putting certain contracts in place, and then, we would look at the reprocurement of the services that were secured by that contract in a period of time prior to the expiration of the contract. We had additional steps that we needed to take to negotiate the inclusion of the Metro Detention Facility as part of the services provided under their existing contracts. And it just honestly was a pretty significant lift on a couple of those contracts that we have. They had existing contractors in place, and we ended up, amending those contracts to accommodate the additional numbers of inmates that were going to be brought under the Davidson County Sheriff's Office management due to that transition. So we do, I hope I'm answering your question, we do support them on an ongoing basis. We just had additional work above and beyond what we would normally be doing for them to accommodate that transition.
Now that answers my question. That was a pretty significant move. And so when I saw that, I just have a couple of questions about it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Ms. Lane, do you have any final kind of wrap-up remarks on this topic, or are you ready to move into our next part of our agenda?
No, I mean, I'm good. If there are no other questions, with moving to the next item on the agenda.
Okay.
Before we go, I would be remiss to not make remarks about the positive parts of the report and the achievement of 16% of DBO for the fiscal year thus far. It looks like what I read. So kudos there. Definitely, we definitely should celebrate our progress. We only get to meet, once a quarter nowadays. But, so it can't go, can't go past while I'm being critical. I want to definitely be appreciative of the work you're doing.
We appreciate that, Mr. Harden.
And
there are quite a few people on this call that have worked very, very hard to get those numbers up, and we appreciate them.
Madam Chair, I'm really sorry because I failed to do something here, which is to refer board members to the other reports that are made available in their binders related to the SBE and SDV and MWBE program updates. And Mr. Harden has intimated some of that, as well as our business development and outreach report updates for the quarter and our key performance indicators. All of that information is in the binder as well, or in the packet.
Okay. Thank you. We have several procurement regulation modifications that will be presented to the board today, and we will walk through each of these independently and take action on any recommendations that we agree to. So, Ms. Lane, would you please move to item 1 and refer the board members to the page and the PDF document that they should be reviewing.
Yes, ma'am. And if I may, Madam Chair, I would request just the board to consider one of these procurement regulations out of order if we can. And that is just simply because there may be some questions, I'm not certain if there will be or not, for our Public Works Department. But I know that there's a potential schedule conflict. And to the extent that we're able to move the last item, which is R4.08.080.01 for consideration first, I would appreciate it.
Okay, without objection from the board, I'm okay with that. Any objection from other board members to consider that item first? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Lang.
Okay, thank you so much. The first item that is presented relates to the selection of architects and engineers. I'm incredibly thankful for our law department because I find myself doing so many things and I occasionally miss a thing or two. And I'm thankful for the additional review from Ms. Amos and Ms. Eke to ensure that the information we presented here today was complete and accurate. To that point, there are two items related to the selection of architects and engineers. The first item is, and they're both related to the selection process.
Can you refer them to the page in the packet, please?
It is on page 7 of 12.
Thank you.
And that's the final version. If you were to look at the red line version, it would be on page 11 of 12. And so the request here is to modify the selection process portion of the regulations at 408.080.01 to include some specific language in the selection process related to those projects that are funded in whole or in part by the Tennessee Department of Transportation. And the language is there. It specifies that in instances where the metropolitan government issues a request for qualifications for architectural and engineering services funded in whole or in part by the Tennessee Department of Transportation, that the procurement and selection process will comply with the most recent local government version of the TDOT consultant selection policy. And this request to add this language to the section comes at the behest of TDOT, who has indicated that we need to have this selection policy adopted by our legislative body or by our appropriate board as a condition of funding. So in so much as, the Metro Department of Public Works, our Parks Department, our Planning Department, all receive funding for design often from, or for A&E services often from the Tennessee Department of Transportation, and we serve as a political subdivision of the state. This information was presented to the law department for consideration, and this is the language that we have proposed to include at the end of or in the selection process portion of the regulations.
Ms. Lang,
for any questions.
Ms. Lang, my understanding is that if we do not adopt this TDOT language, that we would no longer be eligible to apply for any of their grant funding for these projects, for particular projects. Is that correct, or is that a question for Public Works? I'm happy for Ms. Whitelaw to weigh in, but my understanding is that they will not approve our awards without this. We are actually in the process now. We're awaiting the action of this board in order for an additional grant modification to be approved by TDOT. Okay. Ms. Whitelaw, would you like to address the board, or has all of that been characterized properly in your view? And if you would introduce yourself to the board, please. I know who you are.
Sure. Hi, my name is Shanna Whitelaw. I'm the Interim Director of Public Works. I've been here for about 3 months, so I'm learning a lot about these sorts of things. But yes, as what has been said and indicated is correct, that TDOT is requiring us to change this language such that we can have our proposals, our awards matched by TDOT or the grants provided by TDOT at what they've agreed to. Without this, they will no longer provide that funding.
Thank you, Ms. Whitelaw. I'll take any questions from board members now on this revision request. And those questions could come to Ms. Lane or Ms. Whitelaw.
Madam Chair, may I add one additional point?
Yes, please.
I would like to note for the board that this will not constitute a change in process, that we have been complying largely with this process. However, we've not had any specific recognition in our procurement regulations of that selection process. And so largely this administratively adds language to the regulations that specifies what we already engage in practice today.
Okay. And Ms. Lane, this proposed update has been approved and vetted, and the legal department is okay with the noted changes, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And as an additional point, we conferred with the Tennessee Department of Transportation on the proposed language to present to this board, and they have confirmed that it satisfies their requirement.
All right. Mr. Harden, would you like to be recognized?
Yes, thank you. Has there been any more feedback from the architectural engineering community? Any firms express any concerns with, or are they widely aware of this update?
Ms. Whitelaw, that may be best for you. Are you aware of anything amongst the community?
I am not aware, thank you. I am not aware of any pushback or anything. This is pretty standard. So a lot of the architects and engineering firms that we use, they do business with other cities that also, and with TDOT directly. So this is not something that's unusual or unexpected from them.
Ms. Whitelaw, thank you so much for that response.
Any other questions from board members? Mr. Cooper, Director Cooper, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you. Just want to make sure, since we're on the last item on these modifications, which is the Rule 4.08.080.01, there are 2 proposed modifications to that rule as I look at the red line. One is a revision to subsection B to reflect language required by TDOT. The other is to delete subsection A. I just want to clarify, I don't understand that the deletion of subsection A is being required by TDOT. My understanding is that is rather to reflect action by the Metro Council in Ordinance 2020-449. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That is correct.
That is correct, Director Cooper. Ms. Lane, you may want to, before we take any action or a vote, you may want to explain that second portion to the board members.
Okay. To Director Cooper's point, B, related to the selection process and is as we have described. There is a subsequent modification requested to A, and I'm sorry that those are out of order, but this is an instance where we've worked really hard on the master list process, and thankfully our law department said, hey, don't forget, you've got to modify your regulations to be consistent with the code change. So that was not a late add-on, but an additional item that was added after the development of the document. So the A master list section of 4.08.080.01 requests the elimination of the previous regulations related to the master list in so much as the master list has been eliminated pursuant to council action. So those items would, or that language in the red line version, page 12 of 12, starting on page 11 of 12 and continuing on 12 of 12, that language would no longer be needed. So we are requesting removal of that language from the regulations. Additionally, there is some cleanup language that is redlined in blue, that modifies some of the language that was modified in our previous, in your previous board meeting related to the A&E Review Board, being hereinafter referred to as the Evaluation Committee. And you can see that language there. It also removes a section related to the review of the mayor. The mayor is still, required, my understanding, and the law department can correct me if I'm wrong, to sign those contracts, but the review of the selection is no longer required, and therefore the language needs to be modified to reflect that. So those are the changes to Section A of the selection process that are being recommended as well, in addition to Section B, related to the inclusion of language required by the Tennessee Department of Transportation. I'm available for any questions.
Ms. Amos, I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Since these are they're the same regulation, but two distinct actions, would it be your recommendation that we take these separately when we consider those, or is one consideration acceptable?
I would recommend that you vote on them separately.
Thank you. So keep that in mind as we consider motions, everyone. Okay, is there any other discussion on these two regulations? Director Cooper, I see that your hand is still up. Do you have another comment?
No, I guess my arm was getting tired. I just forgot to take it down.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be sure. Okay, so I will, seeing no further discussion as it appears, I will consider a motion for the first item that Ms. Lane discussed in terms of the TDOT requirement.
This is Bob Cooper. I make a motion that we adopt the change as required by TDOT.
Do I have a second?
Second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Okay, Ms. Cantlin, would you take a roll call vote?
Yes. Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Yes?
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes unanimously. The second part of these regulations has to do with the adjustment to the A&E listing. May I have a motion from a board member to act on that recommendation?
Make a motion to act on the recommendation for the modifications for A&Es.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
I'm not sure who the second got feedback.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I got feedback. I'm not sure who seconded that motion.
Oh, that was Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, Ms. Cantlin, would you take a roll call?
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Aye.
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously. Ms. Whitelaw, thank you for joining us. if you're still there.
Yes, thank you very much for passing this. I appreciate it, and we hope to get many grants from TDOT with this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, back to you, Ms. Lang.
Thank you. Then the first item in the list on the agenda now, going back to that item in the procurement regulation modifications, we are requesting a modification to procurement regulation 4.36.010. It is listed in page 6 of 12 in the final version of the modifications document, and is listed on page 9 of 12 in the red line version. What we're requesting is the addition of language that clarifies when details of a protest must be submitted. The way that the language reads currently, it specifies that anyone who feels that or believes that they've been aggrieved in connection with the solicitation or award of a contract has 10 days to protest to the purchasing agent after such aggrieved person knows or should have known the facts giving rise thereto their grievance. We are requesting the addition of language that specifies that in that initial protest that is submitted in writing to the purchasing agent, that the details need to be explicit in that initial protest letter. And that's important as it relates to the 10-day period. If the protest points are not specified or enumerated specifically in that protest letter, then in all technicality, beyond a 10-day period, the aggrieved person could continue to bring additional points of protest. So I think it's kind of inherent in the language, but the recommendation of legal counsel was to make it more explicit in the regulations. I'm available for any questions.
So Michelle, this is Shannon. What happens if you get this protest document and it doesn't detail the facts? What happens?
When we receive letters of protest, if there are no explicit points of protest and they just simply say, I protest this award, I have followed up with those offers so long as it's within that 10-day period, and notify them that we would need specific details regarding the facts that gives rise to their protest or to their grievance. And in cases in the past, within that 10-day period, we've received additional details that lays out what the points of protest. Some offers will simply submit a letter and say, hey, I'm protesting this, without providing us details of what the protest is in an effort to stop the clock. And so what we want to know is that you've provided details regarding the facts that caused you to be aggrieved. What will also happen occasionally is we will receive specific detailed protest information. We will then conduct the protest hearing, and the offer will have had additional time to think of other things. So they then bring additional items to the protest hearing. And what we're saying is, all of the information is known at the time of the intent to award. We provide you with all of those details. And to the extent that is true, you need to provide us with a protest that details the reasons for your grievance.
There's not necessarily a penalty, if you will, if they don't provide those facts within the 10-day period. It sounds like you guys will continue to work with them. It's more a matter of trying to encourage them to provide as much detail as possible on the front end.
Typically, our practice has been that if we don't have specific points of protest enumerated in the letter, then they are not considered.
Can I provide an example, Michelle?
Yes, ma'am.
As chair of the appeals board, I will give you an example that The first item in the process, if you will, is for these, the vendor can submit a protest appeal, and then Michelle makes her determination, and then it would go to the appeals board. I have found that on the appeals board, that on occasion we have had offers try to introduce new grievances by the time it gets to the appeals board. And we have to dismiss those because we'll say that those have not been previously disclosed during the protest period. So I think adding this at that earlier step before it gets to the appeals board will give greater clarity in terms of what these protesters may submit in terms of their documentation as to exactly what they're protesting. And then you don't, I mean, it really would smooth the process out a little bit, I think.
So I think there's just one final question for me on that, Van. I mean, as I read through this, do we actually have that process outlined someplace? Because when I just look at R4.36.010 on its own, it feels like there's a whole lot that's not necessarily within that section. Is there a companion section someplace that outlines those things, or are we just kind of relying on our past practice?
I would say legal may want to take that question, because there is a very detailed process in terms of how protests should be handled. Macy, did you want to take that? Yeah.
The Metro Code also in section 4.36 outlines the process. And I do believe that, and Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you all send out a letter that outlines the steps that aggrieved parties are to take.
So when each award is made, there's detail that indicates that, the offers have 10 days to make their protest. It does not enumerate all of the details that are included in 4.36010. This paragraph that we've presented is the only portion of the regulation that we're recommending change to. It is not the only portion of the regulation. So if you were to look at the regulations for this section, authority to resolve protested solicitations and awards in its entirety, it provides details regarding the right to protest, what that mandatory procedures, administrative procedures are, the authority to resolve those protests, the decision and the notice of the decision, as well as the finality of the decision, are all detailed in the regulation. So it's a pretty expanded regulation. The portion that we're requesting modification to is just the first paragraph related to the right to protest. So that's why that's the only portion that's presented to you here. But offers are pointed to the regulations and notified that they have a 10-day period to lodge any protest if they feel they've been aggrieved.
Got it. I thought that was likely the case. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I be recognized? Madam Chair.
I needed to unmute myself. Mr. Harding, you're recognized.
I think Board Member Raven raised a good point. I was thinking about that, and I wonder if this should definitely help our procurement process. But when we use the word detailed, and then it looks like the first layer of judgment for somebody to determine. Well, the purchase agent would have to determine if they think there's enough detail, or would the purchase agent and would Michelle get assistance from an attorney? Because I wouldn't want her to get hung out there with saying, "Oh, you don't have enough detail," and then send a letter saying that, and then it causes further action or further cause. So when you get the detailed information within the 10 days, then at that point when you say, okay, I think you have enough detail for us to at least go to the next level. So what does that process look like? So we're not caught into another legal matter, if you will.
Yeah, so Mr. Harden, what happens is once the protest is presented, if it is lodged timely, that is within that 10-day period, the offerers are notified that there's been receipt of their timely submitted protest. And then we will connect with them under separate cover for those next steps. Those next steps typically include the scheduling of a protest hearing. And in that protest hearing, the protesting party has the opportunity to provide any additional support for the items that were listed in their initial letter. The reason that this piece of this modification to the regulation becomes important is to the point that the chair made earlier, because the protest meeting may not occur for 2 weeks, or depending on schedules from when the letter of protest was received. So that's clearly outside of that 10-day period. But what will often occur is that offers will come to that meeting and they've used that additional 2-week period to find additional points of protest that were not originally presented in their letter. And it's, this is an effort to really kind of curtail that. Now, people, offers protest often. Sometimes those protests are with merit, sometimes they're without merit. So as long as the letter of protest that is received indicates why they are protesting, that's the important piece there. To Ms. Raybon's previous point, if it doesn't detail why they're protesting and it's still within the 10-day period, I will follow up and ask them for more detailed information. And then once that information is received, whether it is, something that ultimately is determined to be without merit or not, they still have kind of that due process, if you will. We give them the opportunity to present in a protest hearing format the information that they believe supports their basis of protest.
Understood. Thank you. And I wonder if in a follow-up question, I would wonder if Nikki or Macy would have any concern with the language as your revision request to be written. And if it's good, I don't want to make it more than it should be, but just don't want you to get caught up into that detail. But it sounds like you have a decent process from my perspective.
Ms. Ammons?
Macy, we worked with Michelle on drafting the regulations that you're seeing today. And also, whenever she does get a protest, she and I are in communication almost daily anyways, but whenever she does get a protest, we always talk through them before any other communication gets sent out or before the protest hearing is set. We've discussed the merits of the protest.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Madam Chair, if I could just add one additional reminder.
Please.
The inclusion of this language, I just want to note from Mr. Hart, and I think it's a good point to make about where we stand legally with these, but this was a recommendation of the law department that we add some language that provides this clarity.
That's an important reminder. Okay, any other discussion, or would someone on the committee like to make a motion?
Talia, this is Bob Cooper. If I could make one friendly suggestion here. The new sentence refers to such facts shall be detailed, referring presumably to the preceding sentence. The protest shall be submitted in writing within 10 days after such agreed person knows or should have known of the facts giving rise thereto. I assume we're not asking them to detail facts they should have known but don't know, and are just limiting this to facts of which they know, because if they don't know them, they certainly can't detail them. I guess I assume that is the intent of that last sentence.
Yes.
Okay, and so that then if they were to learn other facts in the future, this is only requiring them to state facts that they are aware of. It's not acting in a preclusive manner to say that they can't produce additional facts in the future when they become known to them. Is that a fair statement?
I think that it is. I think that to my previous point that much of the information is made available after award, and the protests are made available publicly regarding the solicitation after award. So offers have the opportunity at the time that the information becomes publicly available to review all of the information and basis for award. And if there's any, grievance related thereto, the idea here is that they would then have 10 days from that point that information became available to them to file their protest and to provide us with details with the information or the basis or the points of their protest at that time. My thinking and what I think is true in the spirit of the integrity of the process and the fairness of the process is if there's any additional information that becomes known that was not included in that information at the time that it was provided to all offers, that you would consider that almost as a reset of the 10-day clock.
Okay, I guess I'm not sure I followed that last bit. They would be able to reset the clock if they provided additional information, or that the additional information would be excluded because to allow it would be to go outside the 10-day period. I guess I'm trying to, because the 10-day period, are we putting some sort of statute on them in terms of the facts they can rely on?
What I'm saying there is if there was information that was not made readily available in the public documents pursuant to the award, that become available in some way for whatever reason after the 10-day period, that it would not be reasonable to hold them to the 10-day period of the original intent. But once that information becomes available, to your point of what they knew or should have known, they then have an opportunity to launch the protest based upon new information provided to them.
Okay.
Director Cooper, did that answer your question?
I think so. So the new sentence is intended then mainly as an informational requirement to facilitate this process going forward, but is not preclusive of allowing the party to rely on information that may become known to them after they've made this initial filing. Is that the intent of this sentence?
I would say yes, to the extent that information is new to all potential offers and is not included in the initial intent to award documentation.
Okay. If there's information that is generally available, but that they don't put in their initial notice, are they then precluded from using that information subsequently?
In the past, our practice has been that the consideration of protest is limited to those items that were detailed in their initial protest. So often what will happen is, offers will protest on points A, B, and C, and they'll say these things have been, these actions have been incorrect, and we want to protest. We believe we've been aggrieved. When we get to the protest meeting, they'll say, well, in addition to A, B, and C, we also want to protest D, E, and F as well. And so they'll bring additional points of protest at that time, at that meeting, that is based on information that they knew or should have known when they lodged the original protest. And so
And part of that, Michelle, is that they will not have identified that within that required time frame.
Period of time, exactly.
Because there's a time frame in which to identify what you are protesting exactly. Was it 10 days?
Yes.
So if, for example, the protest hearing is not scheduled for a month later or 3 weeks later, they will have had 2 or 3 weeks beyond that original 10 days to show up at a hearing with additional content that the purchasing staff would not be, have been notified of being items that they are concerned with.
And not necessarily related to the items that were in their protest.
Right. That's really where it gets particularly sensitive.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
suppose it's the like Michelle said, the D, E, and F, suppose they are legitimate concerns.
I think if there are legitimate concerns, those concerns, I think, I don't know if I would call that a reset of a clock, or I don't know what the proper term would be, but I do think you have to revisit your timeline, and you may have to be called upon to provide extra time. That's just my opinion. I don't know if legally this would, as written, if that would permit that or not. So I would defer to legal in terms of how much, with this edit, how much discretion would remain in terms of timing and response.
Well, the language still remains with the protest shall be submitted in writing within 10 days after such aggrieved person knows or should have known of the facts giving rise thereto. So if there are new facts, arguably you would have 10 days after you knew or should have known of those facts to submit another protest.
Correct. And that's very well stated, Macy, but that's what I mean, Director Cooper, by the reset, is that there are new facts that were not evident at that time that are becoming available now to the protesting offer and all offers. And so they would now have an additional 10 days from receipt of those facts to lodge a protest regarding that.
And I think that is fair for our bidders, give them that extra opportunity if the facts change.
Correct.
I just would want to make sure that that any changes we make don't preclude that action. Director Cooper?
Okay, and yeah, I would have the same concern. And so I guess the understanding is that this sentence then is not intended to preclude that situation.
That is correct.
So in the policy, Don here again. So in the policy, if they follow the here and they submitted detailed as much as they know with of a protest information within 10 days of the award or whatnot, says if new evidence or new concerns, then somewhere it says that they could be granted extended time to gather more information, or what does that lead one to do after that? Is it written somewhere?
Mr. Harden, this is Macy. If you look in the second to last sentence where it says the protest shall be submitted in writing within 10 days after the aggrieved person knows or should have known of the facts giving rise thereto, if there are new facts that are available to all of the parties after the original award is made. So say the purchasing agent releases a document 13 days after the award is made and says, I'm sorry, I failed to release this when I released the documents after the award was made. This was another reason or basis for why we gave to, say, Toyota. Then after she releases that document, because there are new facts, there are 10 days that aggrieved parties have to submit a protest because there are new facts giving rise to, the protest.
Okay, I think I was thinking the other way around. It sounds like, well, maybe you touched on it a little bit, but I guess I was thinking that not new information from the offerer, but new information. Well, if the offerer, if let's say ABC Roofing submitted a bid 10 days later. Within the 10 days, they didn't win, and after award, and then they found they thought they were done wrong or aggrieved or whatnot, and they submitted their detailed response, and then they discovered after the 10-day period that there was two other flaws in this situation, and that we should have named, but when Metro offers that time for them to address it, the other two items they couldn't bring up. I guess that's kind of what, and they were really legitimate items. They would not be able to bring those up at all. And I think that's what I wanted to be clear on. If that's what the rules are, and they couldn't really introduce anything new after that, because you guys say you have a problem with that on the appeal side, then are we saying that they're not allowed to address anything new henceforth after that? I guess that's my clarity for me.
If I could, Madam Chair, I think that you made a point earlier about, consideration of, significant items. I think that, my responsibility as purchasing agent really is to ensure that we're moving and taking procurement action that is in the best interest of the metropolitan government and that is most advantageous to Metro, as enumerated in the duties of the purchasing agent in the procurement code. To the point, I think that this language provides a framework for how we should be considering protests in an effort to ensure some fairness. But to the extent that there are items presented that are inconsistent with what is in Metro's best interest and most advantageous to Metro, I believe that in my role, I have an opportunity to consider those things. I would certainly consult with legal on the extent to which I would consider them in the context of a lodged protest. But those items, nonetheless, if brought to our attention and have a significant bearing on, what's in Metro's best interest, I believe that I'm required to consider them in some way.
Director Cooper, you're recognized.
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down again. I have nothing additional to add here.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, I would like to consider a motion by any board member to either adopt or edit, or as you so choose.
This is Bob Cooper. I'll move to adopt.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Cantlin?
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Aye.
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion passes. Ms. Lane, next item.
Yes, ma'am. The next item in the list of procurement regulations for consideration for modification is Regulation 4.12.095.01, privatization contracts. That is listed in the packet of information on page 6 of 12 of the clean version, and on page 9 of 12 of the red line version. This language simply seeks to clean up the language this modification, seeks to clean up the language in the existing regulations, which are outdated and reference specific dates, 1995. We are proposing a modification of this language to ensure that there is no inconsistency with the Metro Code of Law, Section 4.12.095, regarding the same issue, which is privatization contracts. We propose modification of the language to read that no contract which provides for privatizing, governmental services shall become effective unless it complies with the Metro Code Section 4.12.095. Simplifying this language and cleaning it up this way ensures that we don't have any inconsistency or contradiction with the code. And though the code would govern, I think it just makes it, from a housekeeping standpoint, it makes the language cleaner. I'm available for any questions.
Ms. Lane, I don't think I see the revised language. Can you point me to that page, please? I think I see the deletion, but I don't know that I see the revision.
It is on page 6 of 12.
Okay, thank you. Let me jump to, I was still on the deletion part. Okay. Thank you. And again, this is just to get us housekeeping. Any questions on this proposal from any committee members? Okay. Seeing none. Mr. Harden, did you have a question?
No, I was going to move for adoption.
Okay, Mr. Harden, you're recognized.
I move for adoption of this revision.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second, Mr. Shannon.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, Ms. Pentland.
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Aye.
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Sorry. Aye.
Shannon Raybon.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Lane. Next item.
The next item requests a modification to the procurement regulations, section 4.12.200.01. I would first request that the board members consider a correction. You've got listed on page 6 of 12, as well as on page I'm sorry, it's on 6 of 12 and on page 9 and 10 of 12 in the red line version. We presented this item for consideration by the law department. And in so much as there is a pending legislation submitted by Council Member Zawara related to this exact item to modify the procurement code to specify that all procurement records shall be retained for a period of at least 3 years. The originally presented language by the procurement division is what was in section 3. At the recommendation of the law department, we've accepted their change for it to read as is specified in the second paragraph. All procurement records shall be retained and disposed of in accordance with records retention guidelines and its schedules, et cetera. So my request is that the initial item that reads all procurement records shall be retained for a minimum of 3 years be eliminated and not considered by this board. Be eliminated from consideration by this board.
And instead, we are considering the proposal as written on page 9 and highlighted in red, correct?
Yes.
Page 10, sorry, page 10.
Yes. All procurement records shall be retained and disposed of in accordance with records retention guidelines and schedules approved by the Standards Board, the Public Records Commission, and the Director of Law. All procurement records shall be retained for a period of at least 3 years. However, a longer retention period may be established. And that is also, as a point of information, consistent with the recommendation made by internal audit and the procurement division audit. And the architects and engineers audits that were conducted, managed by the internal audit division or department. And their recommendation was that we extend that requirement to all procurement records as it currently reads in the procurement regulations. It's only applicable to emergencies and sole sources, even though our business practice is to maintain all records for that minimum period of time.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lane. Any questions from Ms. Lane?
This is Shannon. I have one quick, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to ask to be recognized. May I be recognized, Madam Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Just a really quick question at the very end when it says a longer retention period may be established. Who would that be established by, and is there any value in making a point of clarification there?
My understanding is that period may be established by either the Procurement Standards Board, the Public Records Commission, or the Director of Law. This modification to the regulations seeks to place a minimum number of years under which the records may be retained, though they could be retained for longer. So if either of those entities determined that the request was to, or that the need was to retain those documents for 10 years, they could do that. They just could not modify the requirement to be less than 3.
So is there any value then in adding the point of clarification that the longer retention period could be established by the above 3 or 4 points, or do we think that's overkill?
I think that, to some extent, it's already expressed in the language. I would note that this is consistent with the language that is pending legislation, that is in pending legislation to be taken up by the board. By the council, the Metro Council. So this language mirrors exactly what's being presented to council for consideration, and if adopted, would be consistent with what's in the code. It is an added layer of information here, and to some extent, it's redundant to some extent. But the retention of procurement records, regulation that is included to date, if you were to look at that on, on page 9 and 10 of 12, as they read today, are specific only to sole source and emergency procurements. What we're doing is making this language be consistent with what our practice is, which is for everything we procure to maintain those documents, and to make it consistent with language that a member of council has presented as a modification to the procurement code, and specifying, if you'll note, those items are already noted, sole source and emergencies, to be retained for a minimum of 3 years. So that's already in the regulations. But right now it's only specific to sole sources and emergencies. We are seeking to have that be applicable to all procurement activity or procurement actions taken pursuant to the to the source selection portion of the code.
I think that answers my question. Thank you. I'm fine with this. Yeah.
Okay. Would anyone, any further discussion by board members? If not, can I get a motion, please?
That's so moved.
You have a second?
A second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Ms. Cantlin?
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Aye.
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Rayburn.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The motion passes. We have one more item. Ms. Lane.
The final item presented to the Procurement Standards Board for consideration for procurement regulation modification is a modification to 4.12.110.02.3. And it is the standards for subcontractors, standards for subcontractors. That heading is long. It is listed on page 6 of 12 of the clean version of your regulation modifications for consideration, and on page 10 of 12 of the red line version. This item is being presented at the request of a member of council and presented to you all for consideration pursuant to that request. The request was that should Metro have the need to require any documentation beyond an affidavit to confirm compliance with this requirement, that Metro would have the opportunity to do so. The alternative, of course, is that this could have been accomplished via legislation. It is our recommendation that this language is more appropriately included in the procurement regulations. So it is presented to the Procurement Standards Board for consideration, adding this additional line that specifies that the contractor, I'm trying to get back to it, that the contractor shall provide supporting documentation of such compliance upon request from the metropolitan government. So if Metro requests some, documentation of compliance with the requirement to have the necessary business licenses, confirmation of payment of all gross receipt taxes and personal taxes, the addition of this line allows for us to ask for that documentation. I'm available for any questions.
I recognize any committee members. Any questions? I really put this one in the bucket, if you will, of good governance and good oversight, and having an opportunity to be able to access those records when needed. Do we have any discussion? Okay. I will take a motion from a member of the board, if so desired.
So moved. I move that we adopt this addition, this revision.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, with motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, Ms. Cantlin.
Talia Lomax O'Neill,
Aye.
Bob Cooper,
Aye.
Don Harden,
Aye.
Shannon Rayburn,
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. Thanks, everyone. We've had a good day today. We've had a full agenda. Ms. Lane, is there anything else that we need to speak to today for before we close out?
I don't believe so. I believe the agenda as stated lists all of the items.
Okay, thank you. Our next scheduled meeting date is February 11th, 2021. And can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second the motion.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor? I'll say aye. Okay. Thanks, everyone, and everyone.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.